All right, welcome everyone to Understanding the User Experience. So I'm Peter Shrelin. I'm Engineering Manager at Grafana Labs. I work on the Synthetic Monitoring Squad, and I'm based in Toronto.
Hello everyone, I'm Vika. I work also in the Synthetic Squad as a front-end engineer, and I'm based in Argentina.
My name is Marcelo. Hello everyone. I'm also a software engineer in the Synthetic Monitoring Squad, and I come from Costa Rica.
Okay. We're going to start off today with a question and a show of hands. How many folks here have heard of Web Vitals? Core Web Vitals? Maybe you've seen reports that look like these ones somewhere on the web. Okay, I see a few hands going up. For those of you who aren't familiar with Web Vitals, they're these signals that you can collect on a web page that tell you the quality of the user experience you're going to have. There's three that got talked about a lot. These are Core Web Vitals, and you can see them here on these reports. So there's one for page loading time, which is largest contentful paint. There's one for interactivity, interaction to next paint, and there's one for visual stability, cumulative layout shift. So these three signals, among many other Web Vitals, suggest you're going to have a much better experience visiting the site on the left. Some of you may be familiar with it. You may have heard of Grafana.com, compared to the site on the right, which has a lot more orange and red. Now, the site on the right happens to be one, I've obscured the name to protect the innocent, but it's one that I worked on a couple of years ago. And this is what it looked like before a performance optimization effort that lasted 6 months. And this is also what it looked like after that performance optimization effort that lasted about 6 months. So this can be quite a difficult problem, making the user experience better. And I'll tell you 3 lessons that I learned from this experience working on this site. The first is these Web Vital signals, very useful, but they're also extremely broad. So there's a ton of things that can influence them. And especially as your site gets more complex, you add more features, introduce more dependencies, integrate more third-party tools, it could be really hard to understand what's making these Web Vitals degrade. It can be even harder to figure out, how do I make them better? How do I get them back to where they were? So that's the first lesson. The second lesson is that these Web Vital signals, again, useful as they are, only capture one part of the user experience. You go to a site, there's a bunch of interactions you're doing, many different pages you're visiting. There's a flow and a journey that you're going through. And that's not captured by these single page metrics. That whole flow has to work well for the user experience to be great. So we can't just rely on Web Vitals alone. And the third experience, or the third lesson is the experience that I had wasn't very successful, but it didn't have to be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way for you if you take on a similar project. With Grafana Labs, there's tools that you can use and approaches that you can take to go from an okay web experience to one that's fantastic. And that's what this session is about today. So today you're going to see 3 tools, and I'd like you to think about them as 3 slices of Swiss cheese. So you take these 3 slices, you bring them together, and then combined, they complement each other so that there's no holes for the user experience problems to get through. The first slice of cheese you're going to see is front-end observability. This tells you what's going on in the wild. What are my user journeys? How are they performing? How often are they happening? The second slice of cheese you're going to see is Grafana Cloud K6. This gives you lab data that you can compare to your data in the wild, so you can take a user journey, recreate it in a lab environment, and test it under different scenarios, some of which you may be seeing in production, others you may have never have seen before. And that way you can get confidence that when you deploy to production, you've covered all your bases. And the third slice of Swiss cheese we're going to look at is Grafana Cloud Synthetic Monitoring. This lets you take critical aspects of the user experience and continuously monitor them in production. So if they change, you'll know right away because you'll get an alert. So we're going to use these 3 tools together. And to really understand what's going on, we're going to set the stage by looking at a poor user experience. So if we switch over to the video, this is a recording I captured the other day of the OpenTelemetry demo. And I opened the home page, where's my banner image? That loaded a little slowly. I'm going to click on a product here. Where's the product image? There it is. I'm going to click Add to Cart. Nothing's going to happen. Boom, I see an empty cart. Oh, then the product's there. And I'm going to click the Place Order button. And again, nothing happens for a second, and then I get the order confirmation. So very, very short recording, but even in that short time, you can see that there's a couple of things that are off. The images are loading slowly. The Add to Cart and the Order button are a little laggy. So to help us understand what's going on, I will pass it over to Vika.
Thank you, Peter. OK, so let's explore what's going on by describing a few tools that we can use. So first, let's talk about front-end observability. So with front-end observability, we can measure and report on Web Vitals information, such as page loading times, interactivity, and visual stability, in order to provide the best experience that we can. It gives us an end-to-end view into the real user interactions with our application front-end. And it also lets us aggregate, triage, and prioritize on errors for faster troubleshooting. So thanks to recent developments, now it's pretty easy to also go from front-end to back-end transactions by leveraging user sessions and trace identifiers. So now, if we click on this new services button that is linked to a page ID, it will take us to Grafana Cloud Application Observability. So here we can take a look at all the back-end traces that are related to a user session. And here we can inspect, in particular, where the times are spent and the different interactions that our front-end makes with our back-end services. So going back to Peter's user journey, we could see there that there were two main issues, right? So the images were pretty slow to load. The banner and the product didn't show correctly. Like, it took some time to load. And also adding to cart was pretty laggy. So let's try to investigate a bit further to see what's going on, and in particular to find out where to focus when creating a fix for this. So let's play the video now. And the first thing that we can do is we can go to the main page of front-end observability. Here we can take a look at the Web Vitals section. In particular, let's look at the LCP value, which is showing it's taking 3 seconds. This seems pretty high. And it's probably related to the slow loading images. Now let's take a look at his session. Here, among all the information that we have, we can take a look at the page load event. This shows us the different times that are spent in the phases of loading and rendering the app. But nothing really is jumping out here, which indicates that the page document is loading fine. But let's investigate a little bit further by now inspecting the traces for the services and the resources that we are interested, like the banner in particular. We can see that it's loading correctly. We have a 200 status code. But let's look at the traces for it. So let's click this button. And this will take us to application observability. So here, if we inspect the traces, we can see that it's taking almost 2.5 seconds to load this image. And it seems like a pretty high number, right, just for one image. So we know that we might want to improve this with our fix. Let's do something similar now by searching for the cart to get more information about how much time it takes and what's going on with it. So let's inspect the traces for it as well. And here we can see it's taking, well, 2.6 seconds in total, and in particular, the add item operation from the cart service and the get cart operation also from the cart service are taking 1.3 seconds each, which seems like a high time. If we add them up, like, we get this total time. So we might also want to improve this in order to get the experience a little bit better. So front-end observability is telling us what users are seeing, but it will be great to be able to replicate what we see and experiment with changes to see that the fix that we actually work on actually works before deploying it to production. So with this in mind now, let's talk about case 6. So case 6 is a very versatile tool for creating load and performance tests. With it, you can write tests in JavaScript and run them in the command line or in Grafana Cloud case 6. And you can also integrate them with CI/CD to have a great development experience. So what case 6 does is it allows you to create realistic tests in a controlled lab environment so that you can replicate issues that you have seen in production, like the ones we saw today, just now. or you can prepare for situations that you haven't encountered yet. And it also integrates with Grafana Cloud logs, metrics, and traces so that you can correlate testing and observability data in a very simple manner. And recently, we also added support for creating performance tests in the browser. So these tests are great for measuring user experience and finding issues that are difficult to catch at the protocol level. They leverage the K6 browser testing APIs and allow you to interact with your application frontend in order to find and fix performance issues. And with this, we also added two new features, which are the browser timeline and the browser screenshots, which allow you to see in more detail what happens during each of the steps of the test, and also easy access to view and download images from it. And there is also the new browser recording extension. This extension is great for creating browser tests without the actual need to write them, because it creates it for us. So it is available for Chrome, and what it does is it records all the browser interactions that you make, such as clicks and navigations, and at the end it creates a script for you that you can use to create performance tests in K6. So let's go back to our demo. We already identified which ones were the main issues, and we created a fix for it, but now let's try to recreate it, first by recording the same interaction using the browser extension. We are going to do the same steps as before. And when we're done recording, we're going to copy the script that is generated for us here. And with this, we're going to create a performance test in Grafana Cloud. So let's run this test. And the first thing that we can see is that the LCP value is now down to 1 second. Before it was 3, which is a good sign. Now, if we inspect the browser timeline, here we can get information about each of the steps of the test and how much time it takes. And we can also inspect each of the iterations that were executed during this test run. So in a similar way, we can also take a look at the screenshots that were generated for this test. So we can see what happened during each step, so we can get a visual clue of that. But now let's inspect the browser metrics tab. Here we can search for the resources that we are interested, like the banner. So let's filter by that in this field to get a look of how much time it's taking. So now it seems like it's taking 93 milliseconds to load, when before it was almost 3 seconds. Let's do something similar by filtering by the cart URL here to get an idea of how much time is taking now. It says it's taking 1 second in average, so this also looks like an improvement. But in order to get even more confidence, we can create a comparison between a test that was run before the fix and these current results. So let's do that now. We can compare in this visualization. The LCP value in the dashed yellow line is before the fix, and in the solid yellow line is the values after the fix. So we can see that it works in a consistent way. And finally, we can go back to front-end observability, where we can click this K6 browser button to compare data from the real world with our test data. So this is giving us the confidence to know that our fix works, so we can deploy it to production and be sure that it's actually an improvement. But it would be great to be able to prevent this from happening in the future. So now let's ask Marcelo to show us how we can do that.
Thank you, Rika. To recap, what we have done so far is we have set up front-end observability so that we know what our actual users are experiencing in the website. We have also set up performance testing using K6 so that we know that the site can take it. And what happens if a bug goes undetected and gets released into production? When will we know about that? That is the job of synthetic monitoring. Basically telling our users something is wrong, we're working on it, we're going to fix it. With synthetic monitoring, you can continuously monitor your targets or services for multiple locations around the world. We have different types of checks. Protocol checks are the first line of defense in this strategy. We have the DNS check. Basically, the question is, are the DNS servers up and responding? Because it's always DNS. So The second step is, what about the path to our network? For that, we have the ping, TCP, and traceroute checks. And last, we can send out simple HTTP requests to verify that the HTTP servers are responding as expected as well. Between these types of checks, we have enough basic coverage to figure out if everything is going as expected, if everything is going well. For more complex interactions, for example, if you need to send out multiple requests inside a single synthetic monitoring check, we have a check that we call multi-HTTP. Basically, you can set up the multiple steps, collect metrics and log along each of them, and capture the output of each step to be used at any later point in the test. This is built using the same technology that powers K6, the thing that we have been talking about here, but without requiring the users to write actual scripts. This allows us to deploy with confidence and basically monitor that our interactions in the websites are going as expected. But if you think back to what Vika was describing, what we have there is a complex API that might require custom retry logic, and where we might need to simulate interactions that are more complicated than what multi-HTTP can handle. For that, we are thrilled to announce scripted checks. Basically, these are K6 scripts that can be used for synthetic monitoring purposes. With this, you can leverage the familiar JavaScript language and the power of K6 in order to create highly customized synthetic monitoring solutions. In order to author these scripts, you can use the tools that Vika mentioned, like the recorder, or maybe K6 Studio, as mentioned in the keynote. Building on top of that, synthetic monitoring will soon have a browser check type. It's the same kind of technology that Vika showed, so we can use the same script that she was showing us, but for synthetic monitoring, meaning we can continuously monitor our services from browsers, not from just the scripts, and we can collect the metrics and data obtained directly from browsers. If you think back to what Peter was talking about at the beginning of the presentation, Web Vitals, they provide us with interesting information, useful information about the performance of our services. So synthetic monitoring scripts will have access to that information. As an example, you can set up a check, a validation, where you look at the LCP metric, and if it ever goes beyond a particular threshold, you can set up an alert for that. Going back to our demo, remember that we had issues with banner loading and the behavior of the cart. So Vika has fixed that, and we can do something to make sure that it stays like that. The first thing is the banner. Since that should be fast, we are going to set up an HTTP check that is going to have a low threshold, and we will set up alerting with a high sensitivity so that we are notified if it ever changes that behavior. For the case of the cart, it's a little bit more involved. For that, we might need a scripted check. Remember that we need to set up the session ID, we need to fetch a cart, and we need to add something to the cart. If you look at the script that is displayed on the screen, you can see those parts. Create the session ID, add to the cart, fetch a cart. We're also showing that you can set up thresholds at that level so that if, in this example, if the request goes above 600 milliseconds, the test will fail. So if we look at the data as deployed, you can see that for the image loading test, things in the United States are behaving better, but in Amsterdam, our test has come close to triggering an alert at least 3 times in the recent past. For the cart test, you can see that it's been failing most of the time, but if we go look at the time series data that we have gathered using synthetic monitoring, you can see that it's been trending in the right direction. So we actually have a fix. So what we have presented in this talk is 3 different tools that can be used as a standalone tools or in tandem with each other. The first one that we represented is front-end observability, so that we know what the actual experiences of real users is. The second one is K6, that we can use to do performance testing, and we can deploy with confidence that the services will stay up, because shopping season is around the corner. And the last one is synthetic monitoring that allows us to monitor services in a continuous manner so that we can inform our users of issues instead of the other way around. But at Grafana Labs, the story doesn't end there. We're continuously working on all these 3 products in order to deliver improvements so that you can benefit from them. That is our presentation. We thank you for your attention.